Trump does not like the European Union. He said famously that the EU was invented to, quote unquote, screw the United States. Trump's approach to Europe and to the Russia-Ukraine war has actually made Europe more united rather than less. We've seen some very, very worrying cracks in European unity. Is China a competitor, a rival, or a partner, or all of those? Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, the Baltic states, they have not forgotten how life was under the Soviet boot.
You have the leadership, Viktor Orban, who seems to be very vocal about remaining close to Russia. Why isn't he aligned with the European Union when it comes to the efforts that they're making to punish Russia? Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Hindustan Times and my name is Aisha Varma. The big question, is the European Union imploding? We'll be discussing that and more on this HT podcast episode. Joining us at this moment is Mr. John Clarke, a former EU trade negotiator and head of the EU's delegation to the WTO and UN in Geneva. Mr. Clarke, thank you so much for taking out the time to speak with us.
My pleasure.
How much has the European Union's unity been impacted by Putin's invasion of Ukraine, in your opinion?
Enormous impact in many ways. First of all, it has exposed Europe's relative weakness when it comes to its security and defense posture. Secondly, it's been a very, very big drain on European treasuries. They have funded most of the resistance to the Russian invasion, helping Ukraine in that respect. And it's, on the other hand, it has made Europe realize that it cannot rely in the way it used to on the United States security umbrella. And that's forced Europe to do a very serious rethink about how to construct their own defense and security arrangements in the next 20 years.
And bouncing off of something you just mentioned, when we talk about not just Putin's impact, but say Trump's impact as well, if we had to compare between the Biden administration and the Trump administration, what kind of impact do you think both of these administrations have had on the unity of the European Union?
Well, the Biden administration did not have a very meaningful effect on European Union unity. The Trump administration has had some impact in rather contradictory directions, I would say. Trump does not like the European Union. He said famously that the EU was invented to, quote unquote, screw the United States. Obviously, a total travesty of history, and so he is quite content, and in fact is encouraging fragmentation in Europe, dividing and ruling between the EU member states. So that's been one very, very obvious impact of the Trump administration. He's trying to weaken Europe as a multilateral institution. On the other hand, the fact that Trump's support for Ukraine until recently was rather unsure, was wavering. That has actually brought Europe together to some extent, realizing that they cannot rely on the US safety or security guarantee anymore. And so in a rather contradictory manner, Trump's approach to Europe and to the Russia-Ukraine war has actually made Europe more united rather than less.
All right. Thank you for that assessment. Now, taking a look at the outliers, Hungary, for example, you have the leadership, Viktor Orban, who seems to be very vocal about remaining close to Russia. Why isn't he aligned with the European Union when it comes to the efforts that they're making to punish Russia?
Well, it's not easy for Europe to have the kind of political union which it has sought to have. It's much easier developing and establishing a trade arrangement or an economic union than it is a political union. And the different member states of the European Union have very different histories and different foreign policy priorities. It's not only Hungary and Viktor Orban who are outliers. There are several differences between different member states in terms of their attitude towards Russia, towards China, towards the USA, and indeed towards Israel and Gaza. We've seen some very, very worrying cracks in European unity on all of those counts in respect of relations with all those countries. Orban is a very odd phenomenon. He, coming from Hungary, he should know how dangerous Russia is. Hungary suffered under the Soviet Union for decades. However, Hungary's economy is to some extent dependent still on Russia, on Russian energy. We discussed this a few days ago in a podcast, and he's putting his country's economic interests ahead of political unity inside the European Union.
I'm curious, when we also talk about the larger picture, what challenges do you think the European Union is facing apart from, say, Russia, Putin, as well as other member states that seem to not be aligning with overall policy?
Well, the political challenges are how to relate with China, how to deal with China. Is China a competitor, a rival, or a partner, or all of those? Different member states have different views. There are differences and challenges when it comes to what kind of relationship to have with the United States, which there are some quite important gaps between EU member states in terms of US relations. There's been a major challenge in terms of how to relate to Israel and their genocide in Gaza, where member states have been very, very divided. I find that very unfortunate, and this really exposes the EU's weaknesses on the political stage. And then beyond that, I mean, there's a challenge of paying for its own defence, which Europe will now have to do, increasing its NATO contributions, recognising that the USA is not going to be the kind of the guarantor of European security. And the cost of climate change and industrial competitiveness, which are at the end of the day political issues, not just economic issues.
And given the resistance by some member states to the phasing out of Russian energy imports, which you also mentioned a short while ago, what mechanisms does the EU have to enforce compliance with collective trade and sanction policies among its members?
It can sanction member states who refuse to apply the rules on where to source energy. This is being discussed at a high level at the moment in the European Council. What kind of measures can be taken against a member state which does not comply with European sanctions against Russia? I don't think it will come to that. I think what we will see is a slight delay in the removal of Russian energy from the European energy market. It's meant to be done by the end of next year. I think that deadline will slip, but a combination of pressure, of the increase in use of renewable energy, and the integration of Europe's very fragmented energy market, plus higher purchases of American fossil fuels. That's been promised under the EU-US agreement. All of those things together will make it possible to transition away from Russian energy dependence.
Would you also be able to shed light on the internal politics of what's taking place as far as Slovakia and Ukraine are concerned? Because you yourself also mentioned that there are other outliers. Why is Slovakia against providing aid? What's going on there?
It's run by a right-wing populist government, which has that position. I mean, one of the problems that Europe is facing is a spread of right-wing populism in more and more member states, driven by a perceived economic decline and a fear of uncontrolled immigration from the Middle East. And this is manna to the right-wing populist demagogues of the kind that we have now in Hungary and Slovakia, and they are by definition Eurosceptic and reluctant to go further in terms of European Union economic and political integration.
There was also an interesting remark which was made by Poland's president itself. He said he spoke with the ghost of Josef Pilsudski, someone who's known for his anti-Soviet stance. There is some complicated history there, but what do you make of these remarks, considering that you have the leader of a nation openly speaking about being able to speak to quote unquote dead people?
I didn't take much heed of those remarks, frankly. They simply reveal the fact that in Poland, as in other EU member states which suffered under the Soviet bloc oppression, there are different views. Yeah? What I think is positive is that the majority of the Eastern member states, so Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, the Baltic states, they have not forgotten how life was under the Soviet boot, and that is having a very, very big impact on European Union foreign policy.
Absolutely, very revealing. And for my final question, Russia has allegedly been testing European airspace defenses. Do you think that the European Union has to worry about Putin's next moves? Is there a valid threat, or is it just about optics at this stage?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. I think it's more than optics. I think Putin has been testing gently, in some ways, Europe's unity and resolve through his, incursions into European airspace with drones, with aircraft at times. He's testing the reaction speed of Europe against that threat, and also the extent of European and NATO resolve, the Article 5 concept. I think we should worry. We should take this seriously. I think that if these incursions continue, the European response will be very, very tough. I can very easily imagine a situation where an EU member state will shoot down a Russian jet, and if it comes into European airspace. Yeah, I think that's something that the Poles have said they would do, and I think we should take that seriously.
All right, Mr. Clarke, thank you so much for joining us once again and shedding light on all of these developments.
My pleasure, Isha. Bye-bye. Thank you.